Good morning, Dawg Nation. I'm Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Breda Pest Management. Glad you were with us. Jam-packed on the show today. Before we're done, it's Davin Bellamy on a Wednesday. You always love that. Our guy Mike Griffith also stops by today, too. We'll react to some of what we've learned from Georgia after its first scrimmage of the preseason as fall camp rolls along in anticipation of the start of the regular season coming up here in a couple of days. I think a really interesting piece of evidence about why Georgia actually shapes up pretty well compared to the other teams ranked near it in the Associated Press preseason top 25. We will give you that on today's show. I'll also, as kind of, honesty compels me to do, tell you about something that we're not hearing from Georgia fall camp right now that might be pretty important. We'll give you that here over the course of the next couple of minutes. But to start things off with, totally positive, all of it fun. 3, I think, really interesting developments that are taking shape with Georgia fall camp this month so far that could have a massive impact on what we see from the Dogs on the field when the actual games begin. You'll like this off the top. We'll do that and make good use of your time. Glad you are with us for it. It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Breda Pest Management. And it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Breda Pest Management. They handle bugs and critters.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
We love our rumors. We love our whispers. We love the kind of things that we hear coming out of Georgia fall camp. We also know that probably not everything, by the time it reaches my ears, the kind of game of telephone, is necessarily 100% accurate. We're obviously aware of that. But we think most of this stuff is probably at least, directionally accurate, generally true. And with that in mind, there are a few things that we have been kind of hearing as of late that seems to, in some form or fashion, be kind of confirmed in some respects, probably worth talking about here right now for a couple of minutes. In fact, for the next few minutes, let me give you 3 things that I believe count as interesting developments for Georgia at fall camp thus far and could have a positive impact on the version of Georgia football we see this fall once the games begin. Let me start with this. A year ago at this time, and for most of last year, we really did not hear very much about Ellis Robinson. We're kind of the belief, we're going to talk more about this in a few minutes, we're kind of the belief that sometimes no news is not necessarily good news, because when there is something good to report, magically, miraculously, someone almost always does. So when it's quiet, you can't help but notice. And a year ago, things were kind of quiet around Ellis Robinson. And that was a stark silence because Robinson had been one of the highest rated recruits, if you care about individual player ratings and things like that. Robinson had been arguably the highest rated recruit that Georgia had ever signed. And, obviously a premium position like cornerback. There was a lot of excitement about what Ellis Robinson could be at Georgia. And who knows, maybe even some people thought he was going to do that as a freshman. But listen, I don't care how talented you are. For every Derek Stingley who kind of breaks through a few years ago and has a big year for LSU as a freshman, for the most part, the prevailing kind of theme around the SEC is a position like cornerback is one in which experience is going to matter. And the inexperience that Ellis Robinson had maybe a year ago was maybe just too much for him to overcome. And so therefore, you didn't hear much about him because there just maybe kind of wasn't much to say. He just wasn't really the guy for Georgia in that position group a year ago. Well, now, a year later, it sort of seems like things are starting to change. And it is not my intention here to say he's about to be an All-American and he's going to be, the best cornerback that, Georgia's ever had. I'm not trying to overstate this or overhype it. My intuition, my, instinct might be to do that because it's sort of fun to do. I'm trying to be as real and, just, matter of fact as we possibly can, that we are back channels, people who know somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody. We are hearing a lot more right now about Ellis Robinson than we were a year ago. And it sort of seems like when you sort of add this chatter together, including the fact that he had an interception and what we're told was a pretty good play on a throw by Ryan Puglisi in Saturday's scrimmage, when you add all of this together, it sort of seems like right now Ellis Robinson might be making his move a little bit. Does that mean he's going to be one of Georgia's starters, the starter, maybe alongside Dalen Everett? We'll find out. Does it mean that they may feel comfortable putting Robinson in a game now in a way that a year ago around this time they didn't necessarily do? That seems pretty likely to be true. And some of the players around the program confirming some of this. We had a chance to hear from Joenel Aguero yesterday, Georgia's starter, we believe, at the star position. That's the extra defensive back, the nickel back, it's sometimes called. Aguero yesterday said he has seen a lot that he likes from Ellis Robinson. In fact, he was quite complimentary. This is Joenel Aguero from yesterday.
Man, Ellis is a dog, I ain't gonna lie. The boy's a ball player. I knew Ellis growing up. So I've been seeing it in him. So he's definitely gonna be big for us this year.
Listen, there you go. That's confirmation right there. He's a dog. He's a ball player. He's going to be big for us this year. That's the sort of thing that's sort of fun to hear if you're trying to hype up a young man who could give Georgia a big-time impact. Joenel Aguero tells you everything right there you need to know. Probably not surprising, though, that when Kirby Smart had his turn to talk about Ellis Robinson, he tempered expectations just a little bit more than Aguero seemed to want to do. This is what Kirby Smart said about Ellis Robinson when he spoke yesterday.
Just to be the best version of himself. I don't know a freshman that we sign anymore that doesn't come in with high expectations of themselves, and I want that. Like if they don't have high expectations of themselves, then we probably got the wrong guy. Because honestly, they have to be ready to play because of the volume of players we have. We got 50% of our team is year 1 and 2. So if you don't come in on year 1 thinking you're going to play, then, we're probably at the wrong place. Doesn't mean they're all going to play. But he's improved. He's worked really hard. He competes in practice. He can play physical. He doesn't always do it. He needs to do it more consistently, but he is not shy or afraid of contact, and he's got ball skills. He makes plays on the ball a lot, and that's a big part of being a corner.
So a couple of things from what Kirby Smart says there. The idea of making a play on the ball, and listen, I'm not a former coach, don't pretend to be, but kind of making a play on the ball while it's in the air, that is one of the things I would like to see Georgia do better at the cornerback position. Just be a little more skilled at taking the ball out of the air, kind of playing the ball and coming up with that. Georgia's, it seems like their cornerbacks very frequently very good running step for step with the competition and, certainly fundamentally sound in a lot of ways. But there's something to just being the sort of athlete that just goes and gets it, just goes and gets the football in the air, having those ball skills. And Robinson, because he was so highly rated, you're led to believe that maybe he has a chance to kind of be that guy. The other thing in sort of classic Kirby fashion that he says about Robinson there is that he's a guy that can play physical. Maybe he doesn't always do it. Those who were at the scrimmage on Saturday retold an interesting thing. Kirby speaks with the microphone during practice, so you can hear him almost the entire time. And some of that's probably intentional. He wants certain messages to get out. And one of the things it was relayed to me that Kirby said during the scrimmage on Saturday, citing Howie Roseman, you'll know him as the Philadelphia Eagles general manager, who's obviously had a great relationship with Georgia and, used those Georgia players to win a Super Bowl with the Philadelphia Eagles. Kirby quoted Roseman during practice on Saturday, speaking to his cornerback, saying, Howie Roseman said, if you're a cornerback that can't tackle, you can't play. That was the quote, as told to me on the microphone from Kirby during practice on Saturday. It wasn't necessarily directed specifically to Ellis Robinson, just cornerbacks in general, that it's not just about being pretty and running and getting interceptions and doing stuff like that, getting the deflection and then doing all the seatbelt gesture and all the stuff that goes along with that. According to Kirby, as told to him by Howie Roseman, the general manager of the Super Bowl champions, who's drafted 1 million Georgia Bulldogs, as a cornerback, if you can't tackle, you can't play. So as Robinson takes that step forward, we believe it could be happening right now. Joenel Aguero certainly seems to think that it is. It's not just your ball skills. We're glad that he has them. It's also continuing to embrace the physicality of being someone that's not a liability in a run game situation or with so many short passes. Kirby used to call it kind of like millennial Oklahoma, where it's like you just dump it off quick and you're looking to make that sort of one-on-one thing happen. Can you wrap up and bring a guy down right there? That's what the sport's becoming, making those tackles in space. As a cornerback, you have to be able to do that. And, of course, we believe that Robinson's development is such a crucial storyline for this team because we want to see Georgia be great at what we think of as the premium positions, the positions that most commonly produce first-round draft picks. In the NFL, produce the highest free agent contracts. There is just a positional value in some spots. It's far greater than the other positions. Cornerback among the most valuable. To have a guy like Robinson emerge there would be a really big deal. Let me go to the other side of the ball now for a moment to talk about somebody else. It certainly seems like, and it has been relayed to me, that this is true, that a freshman offensive lineman for Georgia is making some very big strides very quickly. We have been telling you there is an ongoing competition at right guard. We thought was Michael Uini versus Daniel Calhoun. We are now led to believe that is a three-man race involving Uini, Calhoun, and now Juan Gaston, the incoming freshman, who dominated sort of in kind of the all-star camp circuit at the end of his recruiting process. We're told had a very good spring practice. A lot of people have said nice things about him there on that. It seems like he is now slimmed down based on people who kind of have some familiarity with all of this. And as has been explained to me by people who know this better than I do, Juan Gaston may be one of Georgia's best five right now. And the spot that's available might be right guard. And Gaston could be ready to jump the line on that and be a guy that really could emerge, I don't want to say out of nowhere because he was an elite recruit, but certainly maybe in the eyes of some ahead of schedule as a possible starter here this year. That's the sort of buzz behind the scenes that Juan Gaston is kind of producing. Now, there are still several weeks before the season begins for a really big guy like this, and all the big guys, the ability to kind of maintain this consistency, especially when it gets hotter, and eventually it kind of is. Some of that may have even started yesterday. Obviously, you got to maintain all of that, but it is really strong buzz for Gaston right now. And yesterday, one of Gaston's teammates, Drew Bobo, the starting center for Georgia, he spoke to reporters and he provided his evaluation of Juan Gaston during that conversation. This is what Drew had to say.
I've been really impressed with Juan. I think he's done a really good job. Just he's huge. He takes up space. He literally, like, when he's blocking somebody on film, it looks like he just engulfs them because you can't even see him anymore. But I've enjoyed playing next to him when I've gotten the chance to, and I think he's done a really good job. But just like a piece of advice I'd give to him is just keep working and trying to master your technique. Just because he's doing a good job and he's doing a good job working on that, and I think he can just, if he keeps going on the right track, he'll be a great player.
I think one of the things that Bobo mentions there, which is important, that even after kind of slimming down a little bit, we're told, Gaston is still just huge. I'm talking about visually. You're like, oh my gosh, what a giant of a man. And apparently during the All-Star circuit last year, I'm talking about like Under Armour and stuff like that, was playing at a pretty heavy weight, way heavier than Kirby Smart would ever allow, but was moving around pretty good even at a heavy weight. And now you're sort of thinking about a more slimmed down version of him. And y'all, this may be just one of Georgia's best five. And around here, I don't play favorites, right? You know, I said this to, was it John Stinchcomb maybe yesterday or 2 days ago? As a person who does a Georgia show, who kind of wants good things for Georgia football, I just want the best 11 out there. I think you get into a little bit of a problem if you start picking and choosing, well, this guy's my guy, that guy's not, so I'm going to praise this guy, I'm going to rip that guy. I think some of that kind of stuff becomes really problematic. It's just kind of gross, right? I want to kind of call balls and strikes and sort of evaluate things the way that they are. And a lot of that for me is going to be leaning on people who just sort of know more than I do. And that is what the folks that know more than me are saying about Juan Gaston at the moment. This seems like it's a pretty serious thing. And as I said before, I just want Georgia to have a good right guard, whoever it is. But one of the things I do like when a newcomer comes in and kind of spices up the competition, we know that Georgia needs an upgraded performance with its offensive line. It was not as good last year as it needs to be. It needs to be better this year. Well, along those lines, and you've heard me say this before, if nothing changes, nothing changes. You've got to do something different if you want different results. And sometimes it's just bringing a different energy to the competition. And consistently, it has been repeated over and over again that new players are capable of bringing a new energy that sometimes others are just not quite able to do. So I'm not necessarily rooting for Gaston over Daniel Calhoun or over Michael Uini. I'm not. But the fact that Georgia has, from its incoming freshman class, a player who might be game ready, they might trust in a game, and might be in kind of a almost a cut the line type of way, vying for some playing time, I think that spices up the competition for Georgia, and that, I think, is a really good thing. So 2 developments that are, I think, really positive for Georgia thus far: potential emergence of Ellis Robinson, potential emergence of Juan Gaston. Let me give you one more thing. I'm going to go back to the defensive side to do this. And in a couple of minutes, when we go around the doghouse, I'm going to talk about something I'm not hearing from Georgia fall camp right now. I think that's important to address. But prior to that, let's focus in on another good thing as it relates to the Georgia defense. I thought yesterday when Kirby Smart talked about one of Georgia's defensive players, I thought Kirby said something very interesting, and it's about Chris Cole. Now, we said, what was it, a couple of weeks ago now, that when the so-called Freaks list came out, Bruce Feldman, a writer that does this every year, the 100 most athletic freaks in college football, or whatever his description is for that particular piece of content, it was laughable that Georgia only had one of these top 100 freaks, and it was Micah Morris, almost all the way down at the very bottom of the list. We know Georgia's got a lot more freakish athletes than just Micah Morris, although we are impressed with Morris's strength. He's just simply not the only one. We also know, and Feldman essentially admitted this in his piece, that the Georgia coaches ain't bragging on their guys behind the scenes. They're not doing any writer's job for them. They're just not. They're not going to help your content. They're not going to give you any kind of background information. They're not going to do anything that overhypes their players ahead of an upcoming season and ahead of an eventual transfer portal whenever that possibly opens. They're just not going to make any kind of this stuff, publicly aware. They just don't do that. But we, those of us who know Georgia football pretty well, know, yeah, there are some, sort of freakish type guys in this Georgia roster that a lot of people around the country do not quite know about. Yeah, we think among them all, Chris Cole might truly stand out because as a linebacker who can run, Cole's also got this fabulous length. He's just a really good looking athlete at the linebacker position. And for those of us who like to let our minds wander a little bit, sometimes it kind of comes down to, well, how could Georgia use this guy? And what are all the interesting ways that Georgia might be able to kind of get the very best out of Chris Cole? Well, guess what? For those who kind of already kind of think that way, some of what Kirby Smart said yesterday kind of also gets you thinking about that way just a little bit more. We're reading into this, admittedly, but it was fun from Kirby yesterday on Chris Cole. Take a listen.
Chris does a good job for us. He's very talented in different facets. He can stack back, play inside backer. He can play on the edges. He can walk out in space and play apex. He's long, he's rangy, but the number one thing is he's a high effort player. He's a high IQ player. So we need him to be a good inside backer. We need him to be a good third down factor. We need him to be a guy that can line up and play on tight ends because of his length, and he's given us that ability.
So we know he's an inside linebacker. We know he's very good. In fact, Georgia's 2 backup inside linebackers, that at least we think of now, Justin Williams, Chris Cole, they may be among the 2 very best players in the team. They're just kind of in a logjam for playing time, and you're trying to figure out how to get the most usage, the highest and best usage out of all those guys. It's incredible the linebacker depth that Georgia has. So we know Chris Cole is a part of that. He's already, I would say, a good inside linebacker. And yet Kirby Smart says, we also need him to be good on third down, too. What does that mean? Earlier in the clip, Smart says this is a guy that can kind of step out and play on the edge and can kind of do some things like that, can maybe run with some tight ends and do all that sort of thing. Now, if you really want to let your mind wander, that sounds like Jalen Walker to me. Sounds like a Jalen Walker type of season from a year ago. Walker, of course, used that to win the Buckus Award. And, it'd be very fun for me about, and the next Jalen Walker is Chris Cole. I try not to get too out in front of my skis on some of this kind of stuff because it's just not fair. It's not fair to the player involved, and it's not fair to all of you. It's important to have a more sensible conversation than just the sort of most hyped version of every point of view. But let's face it. There is a chance that Chris Cole is really very good, and there is a chance that the role that he fits in this year looks a little bit like what a Jalen Walker would have done for Georgia previously. And there ain't one thing about Chris Cole, to use bad grammar, there ain't one thing about him that seems deficient athletically in any way. Running, size, everything else. And I would say that for the Georgia defense to achieve at its highest possible level this season, you are going to have to get a little bit creative, and you are going to have to introduce a player to the nation that's not super famous right now. And I would say that Chris Cole is as good a candidate to be that as virtually anyone, I believe. So there you have it. I think 3 pretty positive developments from Georgia in fall camp thus far. Seems like Ellis Robinson's finally making his move. You love that. Juan Gaston may be kicking through a few doors, vying for playing time, even though he just got here. And just maybe there is some creativity going into the plans for how they use a really dynamic athlete like Chris Cole this year. All of those things we would suggest could spell very good news for Georgia once the games start getting played in just a couple of weeks. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. We are presented today by Breda Pest Management, and we are happy that you're with us. Live, of course, video 10 a.m., radio at noon, Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref, podcast, wherever you find them. Apple, Spotify, WorldFamousDawgNation.com. Whatever platform works for you, we're just glad you picked one. We're thankful that you're part of our show as we celebrate our 10th anniversary all season long. Just thrilled to have so many of you who've been with us for a long time. Those of you who've just joined us recently, just grateful for that. We also appreciate our friends at Breda Pest Management who make this all possible as well. I love Breda Pest Management. Tonight we get back going again, high school football as part of the Corky Kell Dave Hunter Classic. That's why I'm wearing my Corky Kell Dave Hunter Classic shirt today. And of course, I love the partnership we have with our friends at Breda Pest Management here on DawgNation Daily. And I also like the longtime support they provided for us when it comes to Georgia high school football too. What that means is, since 1975, our friends at Breda Pest Management have been embedded in local communities just like yours, showing support for the schools and the athletics around those schools, and frankly, taking good care of homeowners. In Georgia, termites are just a fact of life. It is just a thing that happens. You have to have termite protection. Otherwise, you are putting your most important financial investment, your most precious asset, at least of your sort of non-human variety, you're putting your most precious asset at risk. And of course, you already know you don't want to do that. That's why you're working with a termite company right now. But if you're like a lot of people, and I do hear from these people regularly, you're maybe not super thrilled with your termite company right now because it's like the cost of service is going up, the quality of service is going down. That's why you should make the switch to Breda Pest Management. When you do, it's almost like you're getting your own NIL deal. They're going to put more money back in your pocket just for making that decision. They've been doing it for folks all across our area now since 1975, 125 employees. This is a substantial company doing real satisfactory work, satisfied customers all over the place. That's what our friends at Breda Pest Management are all about. So find them online. It's bredapest.com, B-R-E-D-A, bredapest.com. One more time on that. It's B-R-E-D-A, bredapest.com. Loved having Breda Pest Management as a part of DawgNation Daily. Okay, for us, a couple of great guests. Mike Griffith in a moment, Davin Bellamy before we're done. Let me also give you a couple of notes before we get there, though, starting with our DawgNation Invasion. We are getting ready for it. Great feedback, a little bit of a touch-up on the DawgNation Invasion t-shirt, and all of a sudden now this thing's more popular than ever. Everybody's moving quick to be a part of this DawgNation Invasion. We want you there as well. It's Saturday, September 13th. It's the riverboat on the Tennessee River. Like, that's what we're doing, y'all. It's an amazing experience. We did this in 2023. Folks loved it. It's a tailgate unlike any other you'll ever get any other time. We're going to get on the riverboat, kind of take over the Vol Navy that day. We're going to sail the riverboat up and down for a couple of hours, the Tennessee River here. Honestly, it's a really gorgeous thing, right? You understand why Alabama wrote a song about it. It's a really, really, and I mean the group, not the university. It's a really gorgeous thing. It's a cool way to see Neyland Stadium. Honestly, as much as it pains me to admit, the whole idea of the Vol Navy and the tailgating on the Tennessee River is sort of a special tailgate in the SEC, but we also know these Vols fans don't know how to do it right. They need Georgia fans to show them how. Well, in 2023, we showed them how, and then we went in the stadium and took the place over on the inside too. We think the same thing can happen here in 2025. We want you to be a part of it. We want you to secure your DawgNation Invasion t-shirt while supplies last. Enjoy the buffet on the boat, the beverages with the bar, the special DawgNation shows, DawgNation personalities hanging out, and some of the best Georgia fans you'll ever tailgate with, tailgating in style on a really cool riverboat on the Tennessee River. You're going to love it. DawgNation.com/tailgate for more on that today. That is DawgNation.com/tailgate. Can't wait to see you as a part of the Dawg Nation invasion. Okay, before we get ready to do our great guests here today, let me also get ready to go around the doghouse presented today by our friends at Georgia Farm Bureau. Now, in a moment, I'm going to show you what I think is a really cool stat. It was shared with me. And listen, when y'all sort of give me good stuff, I'm more than happy to give you credit for it and show it on the screen here because honestly, that's just less research that I have to do. And anything that's less work for me is always good news for me. So we're going to give this to you coming up in a moment. But before I get to that here, around the doghouse presented by Georgia Farm Bureau, let me give you something else just for a moment. And this is one of those things where just file it away, do with it what you will, just notice it is all I'm saying right now. So you will remember there were a couple of weeks ago here on the show where I talked about my sort of rules for consuming fall camp rumors. What we said at the time was good news often leaks, bad news rarely does. So therefore, because of that being a pretty trusted rule over the course of years around here, I pay attention to what I don't hear. Sometimes I describe it this way: the dog that isn't barking is the thing that probably matters more than anything else. Unfortunately, a year ago at this time, we kind of came to you and said, hey, if you notice the rumor mill right now, one of the things you're not hearing very much about are wide receivers. You're just not here. This is a year ago. You're just not hearing much about how the wide receivers are performing during fall camp. I said, as someone who views it as his duty to be honest with you and as candid with you as I possibly can, you might want to file this away, the fact that there's just not a lot of positive buzz as it relates to wide receivers right now. And as it turns out, that was a little bit of a harbinger for what ended up being kind of a tough year for that position group. I don't like being right about that, but as it turns out, I was. So with that as the backstory, let me give you this. I would say that the position group right now, that it's the most quiet, or is it quietest, whatever the adjective is. The position group right now, you're hearing the least about, given the caveat that good news often leaks, bad news rarely does. The position group you're hearing the least about is defensive line. And yes, I know that the defense sort of got the best of the offense on the scrimmage on Saturday, at least we're told. Even with that being true, and almost universally that's said to have been true, even with that being true, it's really quiet on the defensive line front right now for those of you who pay attention to the rumor mill. Now, I kind of adhere to the theory of strong opinions loosely held. In other words, the moment the information changes, my opinion will change. So I'm not overly invested in this as an idea. I'm not here to tell you this defensive line this year is not going to be good. I'm not doing any of that. I'm telling you, as someone who kind of observes the rumor mill very closely for a long time, I notice what I'm not hearing, and right now I am not hearing much about the defensive line. So we got a little bit less than 3 weeks left of kind of the fall camp preseason portion before the games begin. For those of you who are active on social media, or you're looking at our chat, or all the places where Georgia fans congregate, watch to see if this does change. Watch to see what you do start to hear. If big-time buzz happens, especially around the more veteran players who've been here and are the most likely to be, if you have high-level performers, it's your veteran guys who are most likely to provide that. Look for news around them in particular. And if this changes, if it starts to evolve and emerge, we'll be more than happy to kind of point it out. Yet our kind of duty to you is to sort of also point out the other side of this too. And while there's been some nice stuff said about the incoming freshman, J.J. Hannon, and some of that kind of stuff, you like that. You like that. I think you'd probably rather hear it about so-and-so, so-and-so, and so-and-so, guys who've been here and are just more likely to hold up under the grind of the SEC. So hopefully that will change. We'll observe it, and we'll see if it does. Now, before I bring on Mike Griffith, let me give you one more thing here real quick. We have talked a little bit the last couple of days about the role that history plays in the Associated Press preseason top 25, more so than people realize. And that if you're looking for, of the higher-ranked teams, how they're likely to perform this season, we think history is a pretty good guide. In fact, you never want to be on the side of the argument that history begins right now and nothing that's happened previous to this matters. That's never true in any discussion in any walk of life. It certainly wouldn't be true in college football. So with that in mind, I think it's interesting with Georgia coming in preseason number 5. We would say that's right within the range of a team that can win the national championship. Preseason poll not very good at accurate specific predictions. For instance, number 1 never wins the national title, but really good at kind of categorical predictions. The top 5, top 6 teams in the country almost always produce the national champion. You have very little in the way of outliers there on that. So the polls themselves, especially in the preseason, are directionally accurate, if not, specifically accurate. And so Georgia being at number 5 is, I think, a pretty good potential harbinger for Georgia. It is also really good when you consider the track record of Georgia compared to other highly ranked teams. Our guy, you may know him from on social media, Dawg Stats. He's just simply DawgStats, Dawg Stats. He shared this with me, and I think this is a really interesting post. It's a big chart. You should go to his social media, Dawg Stats, to see the full thing, because he kind of gives you a little deeper look at some of the success rates. This is something we talked about the other day, about how to define a success rate and things like that. This is worth investigating on this. I'm simply going to sort of focus in on a narrow sliver of what Dawg Stats shares from a much larger chart. That if you look over the course of the last 4 years, which is a pretty nice sample size because it's kind of post-pandemic, and 4 years is almost a full life cycle for a program with freshmen coming in, then going out. Let's look at how many ranked wins that the current top 25 has over the course of the previous 4 years. Both Georgia and Alabama are at the top with 15. That duo far more than the next group. It's Texas, Notre Dame, Oregon, Michigan, who all come in at number 10. Then after that, everybody's sort of in single digits, kind of far below the others, including teams you might think would be up there, like Clemson, Ohio State. They have just 8. LSU's got just 6. A team like Florida's obviously only got about 4, or not about 4. They have 4. So we have said not only is it good for Georgia to be kind of in a top 5 situation, but when you look at some of the teams ranked ahead of Georgia, such as a Penn State that only has 4 wins against ranked, or at least top 20 teams over the course of the last 4 years, well, Penn State is just simply put not a team that has history on its side. Same type of deal here for Clemson, who obviously beaten up on ACC teams, but now losing pretty regularly to South Carolina. Obviously got blown out by Georgia, lost in the playoffs to Texas. This is not a team sort of beating the top-tier SEC teams the way that it would have in its championship era. So kind of a simple point around something we've been talking about is that the preseason polls are more predictive than you realize, and they could suggest good things for Georgia, especially when you realize how much staying power Georgia has had compared to some of the teams that is kind of ranked near it. We'll make that around the Doghouse today, presented by our friends at Georgia Farm Bureau. Now, we're getting back to high school football tonight, and that's true all across the state here as well. And our friends at Georgia Farm Bureau certainly love this because they love these Georgia communities, especially the good small-town Georgia communities where the agricultural output is such a big part of the local economy. These are the sort of folks that Georgia Farm Bureau has been serving and taking care of for a very long time. That's what they are all about. But the same level of service when it comes to your insurance needs that Georgia Farm Bureau has provided to our state's farmers, they can provide that for you as well. And I want you to find out more about them. I want you to give them a call, 877-404-1050. That's 877-404-1050, or online, gfbinsurance.com. When you reach out, you're going to find out why Georgia Farm Bureau is always the home team. For auto insurance, home insurance, even life insurance, our friends at Georgia Farm Bureau can cover you on all of that. So give them a call, 877-404-1050, or online, gfbinsurance.com. Great to have Georgia Farm Bureau as a part of Around the Doghouse. Also great to have Mike Griffith as a part of our show here today. In fact, let's get ready to speak to him right now as DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management, rolls on.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
We'll get ready to say hello to Mike Griffith here. A lot to get into from what happened with the scrimmage on Saturday. Mike, let me start with this. It is a small thing, a couple of small things, but I think they could have a sizable note for Georgia. Let me start with the fact that folks saw Josh McCray on Saturday. This is the running back transfer from Illinois, not spotted when the media saw Georgia's first practice, was spotted on Saturday. I'm led to believe he was a brief participant in the scrimmage. Most of Saturday was spent for him kind of working on some conditioning stuff, sort of on the side. Sounds like he's kind of ways to go to kind of be back in playing shape again. Kirby Smart essentially confirmed that yesterday. Last year, runs between the tackles did not come easy for Georgia. McCray's supposed to be one of the guys that helps provide that for you. Now, it's still several weeks before the season begins, and even a couple of weeks after that before Georgia plays a real big game. But how much more accelerated does Georgia need this process with Josh McCray to be in terms of kind of getting him back to sort of full football shape and ready to be a full participant in what Georgia has going on for a running game that needs to upgrade itself?
Yeah, I think that's somewhat mitigated by Rod Robinson's return. Rod had a carry, and if he's back into shape and back into health, I think that kind of alleviates that issue a little bit. Rod, the same sort of back, 240-pounder. We saw him move the pile in the G-Day game of 2024, so that mitigates McCray a little bit. To your point, it is a couple weeks into the season before they play a team with a pulse. I think this is a guy you certainly want to have for the stretch run. We know that it's a really long season, so that depth is important. But I don't think that anybody's hitting any panic buttons, especially if Chauncey Bones continues to emerge. I mean, that's a 225-pound back as well. So there's a couple of tools in the toolbox there that you didn't have last year when you were down to one scholarship running back, and Nate Frazier was that back. Not as trustworthy as a true freshman. So I think the Georgia running back room is pretty solid right now, Brandon.
Let me also kind of move to this, and this seems like a very small thing, but I think for Georgia, it could prove to be a bigger deal than that. It has been reported, Kirby Smart talked about it yesterday too, that Malachi Tolliver, who would be your backup center, that he's dealing with an injury. People at the scrimmage on Saturday noticed that Cortez Smith, the incoming freshman from Parkview, kind of getting that work with the twos on Saturday, I guess, or at least a portion of that, a good portion of that on Saturday. And this is one of those things where, and I try to limit my gambling talk, but gamblers are obsessed with injured centers. That center is one of those sort of hidden injuries that has a far bigger impact on how a team performs than you sort of think, just because it doesn't get as much attention. A year ago when Jared Wilson went down, Drew Bobo stepped in and played pretty well. That is not always going to happen where a guy with like almost no experience steps into the center position, plays pretty well. Bobo did that for Georgia a year ago. What I'm getting to here is this is sort of, I think, more notable than it'll be given credit for. If Bobo would get hurt, offensive linemen sometimes do, to not have a more experienced guy like Tolliver, maybe turning to a guy like Cortez Smith, very quietly, that could be one of those things that could matter for Georgia. You won't see a lot of ink for a backup center injury, but I'd watch this one pretty close if I was a Georgia fan.
Yeah, there's no question. The good news is, again, that they don't play Tennessee for a month. So to your point, there's other guys that I'm sure they're going to work there. It's not ideal. You'd like to have experienced guys at every position, but especially specialty positions like center, like quarterback, where punter, kicker, where you've got a unique skill set, maybe not as interchangeable as other spots. So yeah, but if you were going to ask me to list biggest concerns you could have at this point in the season, this wouldn't be at the top, but it would be probably in terms of, positions of injury, if it was the starter that was hurt, right? But the backup being hurt, I mean, this is kind of what they say, rich man's problems. I think it's a good thing, and we know the talent that Georgia has in the room. Again, I don't want to downplay it, but it's not perfect. But if that's the worst injury that you had after your opening scrimmage, and you probably aren't going to let it out like that again, I'd say Georgia would probably take that if you would have told Kirby it was this or the unknown.
Well, as I said, it's just something to sort of file away, because it's not a senior who's a backup. It's going to likely be a guy that we like, but if Tolliver's not there, it's probably a freshman as your backup center, unless you're cross-training somebody. So just it's worth filing away that this is a sport now that has less depth than it used to. You don't have senior backups in a lot of places anymore. This would be an example for Georgia where they kind of wouldn't have experience at the backup if Tolliver is indeed injured. I think one of the things that we thought was interesting, we talked about this a little earlier, the potential emergence of Ellis Robinson, I think, is a big deal for Georgia at the cornerback spot. It's a premium position. He's a former elite recruit. Did not hear much from him a year ago. Hearing a lot more here right now. And if you're talking about like dramatic changes in the overall fortunes for Georgia, a guy like Robinson emerging, as it seems like some think that he might. Boy, I think that could be a really big deal for Georgia. And it sounds like with an interception on Saturday, Robinson at least continues to provide some air to the possibility that could be true.
Yeah, no doubt. And I think the fact that he's gotten bigger, stronger, and showing up more in the run game is what gets him on the field. Remember last year, that was the question mark. Was he physical enough to make that open field tackle? And that's where he's always been great at playing the ball. We knew he had great ball skills. And, whether it's him or Daniel Harris, it's fantastic to have three elite cornerbacks. You mentioned the injury potential at center. I mean, if you lose a corner, it's good to have another lockdown guy. And some packages where you may have three cornerbacks out there on the field. Maybe one of these guys plays the nickel, or we don't know what's going to happen. I mean, Aguero certainly seems strong at the star. He's getting some cross training at safety. So I feel really good about the second. I feel really good about the whole defense, Brandon. I know you mentioned early on about not being a lot of chatter about the defensive line. Well, I mean, the elite guys, Griffin and Miller, we're hearing great things about. From a depth standpoint, Kirby's mentioned McLeod. I guess Big Baby's a guy you want to see maybe do a little bit more. But I think this defense is probably as good as it's been since 2022.
We'll see. We'll see. I have a lot of things with this defense that I like. As I said before, I'm ready to hear a little bit more about the defensive line because of Elijah Griffin. Listen, I think he's an otherworldly talent. The idea that he's going to be among the SEC's best as a freshman, that still just doesn't happen very much. So we'll see. We'll see about that. In the case of Christian Miller, boy, I like Miller a lot. And it sounds like he made at least one play on Saturday that certainly got some attention. But I'm ready to hear a lot more about the veterans who've been here. I'm ready to hear a lot more about that. I pay attention to what you don't hear, and it's pretty quiet on the defensive line front right now.
Well, I'm going to go glass half full on you. I know this is kind of a role reversal here, BA, but maybe it means the offensive line's coming together a little better than we thought.
Could be.
I did hear that the offensive line converted in some short yardage situations, even though the defensive line was disruptive and had a couple of those, whistle sacks. They don't actually tackle the quarterback. But it sounds to me like the offensive line has come along, and I think that's a tribute to some of the guys they brought in to help coach the offensive line. Not to say Stacey Searles isn't a good coach. I think he's a great coach. But the more individual attention that you can get, especially if it's the sort of premium coaching that Georgia has brought in this area, I think that's made a difference. And we know that Georgia has recruited this position well. We know they've built depth. It sounds like the health of Freeling and Ernest Green is solid. I talk about quiet. I haven't heard anything about either of those guys, but I'm assuming that all is well, based on the fact they were on the field. You didn't hear about anybody blowing assignments or getting blown up. Now, to your point, could that be the defensive line isn't, marquee? I don't think so. Again, I think Georgia's solved a lot of problems. I mean, the biggest question mark is still at quarterback. Kirby didn't say a whole lot about that. I thought that was interesting. And the way I asked it, I think it's important to note that, is I said, Kirby, can you tell me about the overall performance of Gunner and your tight ends? And he went right to the tight end question. Never came back to Gunner, and surprisingly, no one else asked him about Gunner. But he did talk at length about Ryan Puglisi, and you probably heard the same things I did about some of the throws Puglisi made. So that's a good situation. Speaking of backups, if you've got another guy with some arm talent, and what Kirby said is he made some mistakes, but he knew right away that he made them. A year ago, he didn't. So it sounds like a lot of progress being made there with the backup quarterback. And then Ryan Montgomery. Now, I don't think anybody expects to see him this year, but if your third team quarterback looks competent running the offense and he didn't go through spring and he didn't play the vast majority of his senior year, that sounds like a really good signee to me. That sounds like a promising prospect that, like you said, you take note of and put in the back of your mind. And let's remember, Stetson Bennett IV was buried third or fourth on a depth chart way back long ago. And I know Ryan Montgomery's only a freshman. Stetson by then had a year of junior college and a year backing up Jake. But to me, that's really promising. And I thought there was a lot of really good things that came out of that scrimmage. And Kirby just seemed to kind of try to moderate it just a little bit, qualify it a little, doesn't want to get too excited. But I think deep down inside, I think the head coach is pretty happy with most positions. So
I want to finish with this here real quick, because to go along with kind of the offensive theme, and I apologize, I'm running late, been sort of perpetually late all day long today, I guess. But I think the position group that has gotten the most buzz, that seems to be the most universally I guess, agreed upon. And it's interesting because it kind of goes against everything we're told. Hey, Georgia wants to run the ball this year. They want to pound the rock. They want to do all that kind of stuff. And that's obviously really important given the deficiencies from last season. But the most praised position group from people who are either at the scrimmage or sort of know somebody who goes to a practice or whatever else is the wide receivers. And I think it's really interesting how consistent this has been, even since January, where your pre-spring, your winter workouts, people have liked Branch and Noah Thomas, but they also really like Colby Young. There's also some belief that what Georgia has had is, perhaps ready to kind of flourish a little bit here too. At least one of the freshmen seems likely to play. It is interesting for me how much positive buzz we do hear about Georgia wide receivers, given the fact we think that the overall emphasis for the offense is getting back to the running game.
Well, it's exciting to have playmakers that catch the ball consistently. I mean, what we saw last year was an abomination. It was an embarrassment. It was arguably the worst wide receiver core in Georgia history. I don't think we've ever seen a Georgia wide receiver core lead the nation in drop passes. And of course, we know there was a very big missed audible that cost him pretty much 7 points against Alabama, led to an interception, a touchdown early on. They pretty much cost you the game. Your wide receiver core cost you the game at Alabama last year, and that's a tough pill to swallow when there are guys that have been in the system that long. So I think part of it is just how bad last year's receiving core was, and you turn on the TV and you see other guys in other programs make catches and say, why doesn't Georgia have one guy like that? Now you do, right? Now you've got the joystick player. Now you've got the guy with the juice, the electricity, the dynamics, made KJ Bolden miss on an open field tackle. That's saying a mouthful. Branches, he's all that. And we've heard positive things about the Colby Youngs and the Noah Thomases. And London Humphrey's name kind of keeps resurfacing a little bit. You wonder, I don't think he's Ladd McConkey, let's be clear. He doesn't have those kind of quicks. But for straight line speed and consistency and leadership, sounds great. Just got to get the tight ends going. Brandon, I tried to lead Kirby to the water, and he said, hey, you're supposed to catch the ball when you're open. I didn't see one broken tackle from a tight end. And I said, well, okay, we'll take that loss. And lucky Jaden Riddell and Oscar Delp, the head coach, is raising the bar a little bit on that tight end rank. So that, to me, that was where my ears perked up. And I said, okay, are we going to see 3 receiver, 1 tight end, 2 tight end, 2 receiver? Sounds like Kirby Smart's creating a little competition there for the targets.
Yeah, certainly should be fun to see as fall camp rolls on. Season begins after that. Mike, appreciate your time. We'll look forward to talking to you soon here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management.
Thanks, Brandon. Have a good one.
You too.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
We're going to keep the great guests rolling here in a moment with our guy, Davin Bellamy. In fact, we're going to jump to Davin here pretty quick. But prior to that, let's get ready to go cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. I'll give a shout-out to Star of the Seas, the newest Royal Caribbean cruise ship and the newest in the Icon class of ships. We can bring that music down just a little bit. The Icon class of ships. It's getting ready to sort of welcome guests for the first time starting today. Next few days, it's going to kind of do a little bit of a preview sailing. And then after that, the inaugural sailing will begin for Star of the Seas. This gorgeous new ship sailing out of Port Canaveral. And for me, that's a big deal, because Port Canaveral is kind of our home port. And to think a ship like this is now sailing out of Port Canaveral. Years ago, this would have been unthinkable, but Royal Caribbean's made an incredible kind of commitment to Port Canaveral, which is the closest port for those of us in Georgia and kind of many places like that. It is a drivable port for many people, myself included. So I take a personal sense of pride in Royal Caribbean having a ship like Star of the Seas. And look, for the folks who kind of want the 7-night sailing, when the ships have so much to do and so much to experience, so many places to visit, the sort of 7-night experience to get the most out of it. Well, the good news is that's what Star of the Seas is going to be, a 7-night sailing for those of you who want that, sailing out of Port Canaveral, having an unbelievable experience while on board. Jessica Slater can tell you all about it. You can give her a call, 770-718-9147. That's 770-718-9147. You can also find her by email, jslater@dreamvacations.com. Let her plan an amazing vacation for you on Star of the Seas with Royal Caribbean or any of the other Royal Caribbean cruise ships. Jessica can tell you all about it, so make sure you give her a call today. So we are going to do a couple of stories related to our cruise around the SEC. One of these I'm going to get into with Davin Bellamy here in a moment. Another I'll sort of save for kind of after Davin is done. So for now, Why don't we bring the music down, cruise around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. We'll kind of combine all this together because I want to make sure we speak to our guy, Davin Bellamy, here right now. Of course, we're always glad to have him as a part of the program. Davin, we appreciate your time. Good to have you here today. I always love kicking the topics around when it comes to Georgia football with you. How you been?
Yes, sir, Brandon. How's it going, man? But no, man, I've been good, man. Just can't wait to get back to Wednesday with you guys.
Yeah, listen, I love that. That's always good stuff. I was talking a little earlier about Chris Cole, tall linebacker for Georgia, a guy that going to play some inside. Kirby Smart kind of alludes to, hey, maybe he kind of kicks outside and gives you a little pass rush on third down. We were sort of half kidding, half serious a little earlier saying, boy, that sounds like what Jalen Walker used to the tune of becoming a Buckus Award winner and a number 15 pick in the NFL draft. From an athleticism standpoint, I don't think that Chris Cole takes a backseat to anybody. At the same time, you don't want to put too much on a guy too soon. Do you think sort of hybrid style Jalen Walker type role, is that what you expect or think that could be possible for a guy like Chris Cole here this year?
Most definitely, man. I know, we've been talking about this a lot. Georgia is just on this path of just recruiting these guys who can play inside, in and out. Chris Cole is a guy, he's a track guy. He's about 6'3", man, 235 and can just move sideline, the sideline. And he made plays for us last year, in sparing time, more in just special spread out, situation. So I could definitely see Georgia using him as that, inside backer and also as that, outside back. Georgia has a lot of multiple fronts where, guys have to know and learn multiple positions. And in my opinion, he's the best, athlete that's on the field. So, I definitely expect a big year, out of him. Somebody's going to have, to step up because a lot of these guys only saw playing time sparingly last year. So this year is very, important, for these guys to take the next step.
I think that's really interesting. We've also heard some buzz coming out of Georgia over the course of the last couple of days. Juan Gaston, that's a incoming freshman offensive lineman, giant of a man, and apparently he's performed very well going back to spring practice, his sort of final days as a recruit on the camp circuit, and now early days here fall camp. It seems like he's making a big push and could be considered right now among Georgia's best five, which on the one hand, you kind of take that as good news. You always like it when somebody kind of comes in on a mission. Sounds like Gaston has. It's also, though, in the sort of line of scrimmage, big body positions, 18-year-old young guy, hard to do that. I'm thinking back to your final season at Georgia in 2017. You saw a freshman, Andrew Thomas, step in and play really well as a freshman at the right tackle position and frankly made Georgia better because of it. What is your sort of overall, belief about how ready a freshman can be if a guy like Gaston, much like a different position but still similar age range, Andrew Thomas was to sort of start as a freshman in 2017, how realistic do you believe that is?
This could go, two ways. Either the vets that we have now aren't showing it, on the field, and he's our, best option.
Yeah.
Or he's a guy that's a 3-year and done guy. And we knew that with, Andrew Thomas from the first day, of practice. The biggest jump from high school to college is your technique, especially when we're talking about, the front seven, D-line and O-line. You're playing against guys now that are your same size, and usually these big time recruits are usually the biggest guys, on the field, when it comes to high school. But, when you get to college, you're kind of playing the guys that have the same level that you're on. So just for it to be already speech about him starting lets you know that this guy, is technically sound in his technique. So I think it's a very high point, for Georgia to have a offensive lineman that's coming in, and really everyone is looking at this guy as a 3-year, and done player, especially coming off last year when our, trenches weren't playing up to par as Georgia, football does. So I think it's a very good sign that we have a guy that's probably 3 years and done. 'Cause that's the only way a front seven guy is starting at Georgia in the SEC. And we saw that, with Thomas that he was the top, 15 pick. So, but it can also go the other way in that our, front seven isn't looking as dominant through spring, and we just have to play the young players because, like everyone knows, if a young player is the same as, an older player, you go with that young player. So it could go both ways, but I think the improvement on the O-line is much needed to get to where we want to get to. And he's a massive human being. So that just kind of lets you know that Georgia's trying to get back to that dominant force up front.
When you were playing, especially as a veteran player near the end of your college career, a guy like Andrew Thomas in particular, was there a thought of, who is this freshman, man? This guy's going to have to show me something. Are guys in the locker room, are they doubters? Are they skeptics? Are they, are they, untrusting of a young player who's never done it before? Like, how much of that is there of, well, if this young kid thinks he wants to come in here and play, he's going to have to show me something. How much of that is there truly existing in a locker room?
I mean, that's big because the guys that are already there, they aren't really looking at the stars or who's coming in. Most of the guys that are already there don't even know who's coming in. So, I mean, we judge, Andrew Thomas off of one-on-ones. And we started doing one-on-ones, and this guy is blocking me. This guy is blocking Lorenzo. So it's like, okay, now he's showing it at the college level. So that's why I say, I mean, when you have a 3-year and done player, especially in those, trenches. And if they come in, as a young guy and they're not shooting their hands where the defensive lineman can just knock them down. I mean, I remember, I was going against, Thomas, and I try to throw a double swipe and he'll move his hand, and then replace it. He would force you to go to power and then sit down on you. I mean, he was doing things that a junior does in college, and he looked like a pro, as a freshman. So if that's kind of where you see it, these guys aren't really worried about the stars or the size, because most guys, usually take a year just to get, accumulated to the speed, especially on the edges. But when Andrew Thomas came in, man, he was blocking us in one-on-ones and moving in the run game, and it just looked different. He looked like a vet. So it's very, encouraging for a young freshman to come in and already have, talks about him playing very early. That lets you know that he's out there showing that he's way, way above years, if people think he is.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. Hey, to finish, I want to step outside of Georgia football just for a moment. Big story yesterday around college football in the SEC too involves the Oklahoma quarterback John Mateer. Now, Mateer transfers to Oklahoma after having been at Washington State. And the backstory here is somebody found his Venmo. You know how like on your Venmo you can, if you leave it public, people can see what you gave money to. And there were a couple of payments that were labeled as gambling debts. One of those related to a UCLA-USC game from a couple of years ago. And Mateer has said that's not what it was. It was an inside joke among friends, whatever else. Davin, I think it's one of those things where, look, a screenshot of a Venmo is not enough to suspend somebody. So my guess is he probably bet on these games a couple of years ago. I don't think there's enough evidence to suspend him for it on this. This particular story, I believe, is going to go away. But I have a sneaking suspicion, Davin, that this is an example of something that I think the people that run sports, college and professional, don't really want to talk about. But I have a sneaking suspicion there's a lot more gambling going on among players behind the scenes, because enough of it is bubbling up to the surface that there must be, you would assume, way more below the surface. And so this Mateer story is going to go away. It's not going to be a suspension. People are going to forget about it because as a society we sort of move on. I can tell you right now, privately, everybody who runs college football, administrators, coaches, everybody else, they are panicked about this stuff because they know in a world in which gambling is now largely legal, at least in 37 states, it is very hard to keep your players away from it. And it is a much bigger issue behind the scenes than anybody wants to admit publicly. That's what I believe. You're a player, though. What do you think?
Man, Brandon, gambling is everywhere you look. I mean, the NFL has partnered with FanDuel. The NBA, has partnered with, I think, FanDuel. So especially these young guys, they grew up in this time where gambling, it, I mean, it's just a thing to do. Back when I first started, gambling, not in college, but you had to meet a guy, in a black
Yeah.
truck, and he sat in the back and he
Yeah.
rolled the window down.
Right.
Just so you could see his eyes, and you gave him a ticket and you didn't give him your real name. Where now, I mean, now they got apps. I mean, you can just do it so willingly. And that's why gambling has, you know, there's an age limit because it is a temptation that you have to get, over. And kind of like you said, man, since it's so easy to do, just off the phone, a guy can do it in the locker room. He can do it at halftime. He can do it, before the game. He can do it right, at his couch. Back in the day, you had to know someone that knew a bookie. So I just think it's so accessible now. And these kids have just been, I guess, shown gambling for years. I mean, we have FanDuel commercials during the NFL, during the NBA. So he's not, the only one. The best thing, about it, if it is, a silver lining, is he did not bet on his team and he did not bet on his props. So, he wasn't throwing the games. But I just think it's just too much in these young kids' faces, especially when, we're talking about the NIL and these guys have a bank account full of money. And after practice, you're still a college guy. You have nothing to do. You can just sit on the couch and you can turn your $500 to $1,500 because it's so just accessible. So this is kind of the punch back on, leagues wanting to partner with FanDuel. Because now it's like the athlete is looking at it like, it's okay. The NFL and all these pro leagues are generating billions of dollars off of people, gambling. And that's kind of tainted the reputation of, pro sports, where people think, pro sports is, fixed. So it's definitely a problem, more so not just, in the locker room, but just in society, period. I mean, gambling is just so accessible right now.
Well, here's the one thing that I think, if I'm like in charge of sports, I'm a little bit concerned about, is that I think we used to believe that the players, whether it's professional salary or a college NIL, that they had so much like to gain from playing sports, they're going to make so much money from sports, that they would be disincentivized from getting involved in some sort of gambling scandal because they would just have too much to lose. At one point in time, that was the conventional wisdom. I don't know that's turning out to be true. Calvin Ridley in the NFL, Jonte Porter in the NBA. Jonte Porter suspended, I guess, forever? His brother Michael Porter was just on a podcast, I think it's just yesterday, talking about how, listen, if you can go out and make, he calls them your homies, if you can make your homies, $10,000 by hitting your personal under, you just don't play, and your guys can cash in 10 grand on that. He says guys are just going to do that. Even though it comes at the risk of your career, Michael Porter goes in the podcast, some podcast, and says that's what players are going to do. And I don't know, Davin. I think that behind the scenes, nobody wants to say it out loud because it does, as you alluded to, it calls the integrity of the games into question.
Right.
So public channels, big rights holder media entities, they're going to talk very little about this. But the conversations behind the scenes, I think, are a lot different, where I just think that the disincentive to getting involved with gambling scandals is not proving to be high enough that even if John Mateer didn't do it, there may be a John Mateer-like player who might do it in the future, put it all at risk, because that's essentially what gambling is anyway. And that's, I think, the fear that exists right now, that nobody wants to talk about on ESPN or on Fox, one of these leagues these networks that's in bed with the leagues. They don't want to admit it, but privately, that's what everybody's talking about.
I mean, first, these guys aren't the athletes that we grew up watching, or even my generation. I guess make myself sound, so old, but I mean, these guys, they come from NIL. So when it comes to even uh, choosing a school, to go to, it's all about the money. So in this generation, money drives these guys. I mean, they're getting social media deals where some guys are worried about social media brandships in college more than they're worried about getting on the field. So if I can make $1,500 from my account, just the mind of an athlete has changed. Back in the day, the teamwork, the integrity, I'm going into a foxhole with my guy, those things are kind of changing. And from high school, these guys are getting paid. So from high school, it's all about the dollar sign. So, I mean, even though these guys are making money running around, it's always way easier to make money chilling. And especially when that's all on your mind. I mean, with these apps, so many people know about gambling. I mean, I can remember 4 or 5 years ago, nobody knew what plus points were. No one knew what a spread was. Now, just everyone knows it. So, I mean, it's so just in your face that these guys are 18, 19, 20 years old with a pocket full of money and nothing but dead time, when practice is over. I mean, it's just right there. So this is just what it has came down to with this world, in 2025 is it's money driven. It isn't the same guys that we grew up watching on Saturdays and Sundays. Not all, but a lot of these guys are just taught, go to the highest bidder since high school. These guys are getting 6-figure deals since 17 years old. So money is on their mind, and making money, is on their mind. And just the integrity on the game, isn't the same.
I think it's really interesting, Davin. Good stuff. We always appreciate your insight. Looking forward to the start of the season. Your analysis helps us get ready for it. And, of course, when hot topics like this pop up, we like hearing from you on that, too. Thanks for your time here today on DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management. We'll look forward to talking to you soon.
No doubt, man. And always, go Dogs.
Yes, indeed. Go Dogs, indeed. Good stuff there from Davin Bellamy. And, I'll say this just real quick. I think one of the things that a lot of the athletes need to understand is it's actually not that easy to get away with some of this, because, to use the Michael Porter example of, hey, I want to intentionally tank so my individual player number doesn't go over. The truth is, if you got a bunch of people who are not used to betting, like he used the example of a $10,000 bet, trying to drop $10,000 on a fairly obscure bet like that, the sports book is going to notice. Look, the bets are designed in such a way that you're not supposed to win. So if a bunch of people cash in a bet and it wins, especially when the typical handle would not quite be that for a selection like that, the sports books generally know what's up. That's how they sniffed out the college baseball thing a couple of years ago, just like that. If large bets come in from unusual sources, or there's an attempt to make a very large bet from a source that doesn't typically make those kinds of bets, the book usually knows something's up. So it's not that easy to get away with this unless you're using all kinds of, you got to use sort of like what they call sort of cover up base. You got to have somebody that places the bet for you. If you're not doing that, you're going to probably get caught. But as we said, there was a time when legalization occurred starting in 2018. The athletes got too much to lose. They're not going to get mixed up in all of this. I don't know, man. I don't know. I'm not saying it's happening everywhere, but I think is certainly the concern exists that it's happening far more than we realize. And I think a lot of coaches who get a lot of sleepless nights about a lot of things, I think this is one of the things that's keeping them up at night across the country. It's one of the reasons why, FanDuel, DraftKings, they limit a lot of individual player props for college athletics for the same reason that Davin just mentioned and Michael Porter just mentioned. You can't go to a lot of places and bet individual player props anymore because it's too hard to manage. It's too easy for that player to realize, and hey, there's money to be made here by me just going slightly underneath this number. And so now you don't see very many individual player props anymore involving college athletes because just the universe of college athletics is far bigger than professional sports. There's only 30 NBA teams, 32 NFL teams. There's 100 and something, FBS college teams, so you just see less of it. But that doesn't necessarily make it less of a problem overall, worth paying attention to indeed. The Mateer story is going to go away because that's what everybody wants. But privately, this conversation, you better believe, is happening at a very, very intense level. Now, before we wrap up, I was going to do another SEC story. I'll save that for later on because it's late. Let me give a shout out to our friends at Dr. Pepper. We love Dr. Pepper being a part of DawgNation Daily, one of my greatest sources of pride because I do love Dr. Pepper, one of my rituals before the show begins. I bring my Dr. Pepper from out of my cooler and walk it over and put it in the refrigerator. I'm thinking about it right now. I know that it's sitting there waiting for me as a great little pick-me-up when the show is done. That is what Dr. Pepper provides. We think it'd be great for you. So if you haven't tried the brand new flavor offering, the Dr. Pepper Blackberry or the Dr. Pepper Blackberry Zero Sugar, I think it's a great time to do that as you're at your local Kroger, wherever you're doing your shopping. Pick some up today and enjoy some Dr. Pepper. Nothing goes better with college football than Dr. Pepper because Dr. Pepper and college football, it's been a pepper thing for a very long time. Make sure you check that out today. And as we give you a golden shoe today, first of all, I'll remind you, I'll see you this afternoon and tonight on Peachtree Sports Network for our Corky Kell Dave Hunter Classic. Fun when to get things started. Prince Avenue Christian in Callaway. Their Georgia ties there. John Rick's coaching debut for Prince, plus Andrew Beard, the nephew of Garrison Hurst, really good junior running back for the Wolverines. Callaway, of course, one of the top programs in the state, has been for a long time. This is two state championship teams battling each other. Then in the nightcap, we'll see South Paulding take on Kell. There's Georgia ties in this one as well, including Tyler Chicoum, the offensive lineman, recently getting an offer from Georgia. He plays for South Paulding. Kell is loaded. Braden Rouse, him as the Tennessee commit, so a lot going there with that. We'll see you this afternoon and tonight, Peachtree Sports Network for Corky Kell Dave Hunter Classic. But our golden shoe, our guy Jeff Sintel, hanging out yesterday in Augusta, speaking to a local group there that he does each and every year, the Augusta Bulldog Club. And in attendance, one of the true Georgia legends, one of the 4 jerseys retired for UGA. Fantastic backstory here. Theron Sapp, known as the Drought Breaker, touchdown that sealed the win for Georgia against Georgia Tech in 1958 after a long losing streak, 8 years in a row. Can you imagine that? Georgia losing to Georgia Tech. Theron Sapp broke that drought, and Dogs have been on top in that rivalry, we think, ever since. Good stuff there from Jeff, hanging out with the folks in Augusta. What a fun event that must have been. How about the lousy, stinking Gators? Speaking of rivals that Georgia dominates, certainly that's the case here. 1,740 days. That's how long it's been since Florida's beaten Georgia. It's our Gator Hater Updater. Y'all have a great day. I'll see you back here tomorrow, DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management. And on video, time now for the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. R.S. Andrews is the one you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric needs. They show up on time, do the work that's promised for the price that's promised. So first game today is at 4:30, so I got to get ready. So I'm going to bounce out of here in a little bit, pretty quick today, and we'll come back. I don't have a game tomorrow, so we'll do a lot more comments with you tomorrow. Looking forward to all of that. I'm also going to get some Facebook here. I will talk about the YouTube comments here too. Let's see what else. Chris Jacobs says our offensive line and pass protection has looked elite. With Freeling and Green healthy, they are both looking like first rounders. They always projected to be. You listen, getting those two guys back healthy, and thus far it seems like that's the case. That's a big deal. That's a big deal. I think they're both really valuable talents for Georgia. I think they have shown that at times, and maybe not always as consistently as they would have liked for various reasons, including injury. But boy, they are, and I think I've said this before, they may be the 2 most important players for Georgia. And thus far, they are healthy, it would seem, which is certainly a very important thing. I'll pull up on Facebook here too. Colby Strotter says he stocks vending machines for a living. So excited on Monday to see Fansville Dr. Pepper in inventory. That means the season is here. Yeah. And y'all know I'm a big Dr. Pepper fan, but I would say that Fansville is the one national campaign I've never gotten tired of. I think, and they show the commercials obviously a lot during the season, But I think they're really good, and I think they're funny. And I'm not just saying that because we do business with them, although I am proud of their partnership. I do genuinely mean this. I'm not in the habit of lying about anything. I think they're really funny. They're clearly written by people who know college football, and I think they do a good job with it. Good actors in the commercials. It's all really funny. How about this from Tennille? She says, please acknowledge that I almost died last night. I forgot I was replacing the light switch and tried to turn the light on. I'm grateful today. Tennille, I am grateful too. That's a scary thing. That's one of those like really easy things you can just sort of accidentally do, right? So I'm glad that worked out. I think I mentioned this the other day. We had a little flame breakout at our house the other day that got kind of taken care of pretty quick. These sort of like normal things at home can turn bad pretty quick. So Tennille, I'm very glad you are here today. Very glad you're here today. For various reasons, let's see what else. Joseph Kennedy says he's going to watch some of it with his phone tonight on TV. Yeah, so you can stream the games Atlanta News First. We're going to be on Atlanta News First. That's Channel 46 on Saturday. But if you're looking to stream the games tonight, you can stream them on Atlanta News First. Foster Moss says, who's the first game today? That is Callaway Prince Avenue Christian. 2 state championship teams from different classifications battling each other. And I mean state championships within their history, of course. Neither is the reigning state champion. Philip Jordan Wells shouting out Sheriff Boz, Brian Bosworth, as a part of the Fansville commercial. So last year for the national championship game, even though it wasn't George in the game, I did go. I was invited as a guest by our friends at Dr. Pepper, and I got to go to one of these like the hobnobbing parties. So they had kind of like built this like hospitality area next to Mercedes-Benz Stadium. It's sort of like what you might see at a PGA Tour event. Like they kind of built the temporary structure there next to Mercedes-Benz Stadium, and ESPN was having a party. Dr. Pepper was having a party. I was lucky enough to go to these parties. I don't go to a lot of fancy parties, but I did before this. And in the Dr. Pepper party, Brian Bosworth was there. So got a chance to shout out the Boz for a couple of seconds. That was fun. John Roush says, do you remember the world's largest dog? That was my dad. That's really cool. That's really cool. Really cool. John, that's amazing. Randy Payne checking in, saying he's ready for the DawgNation Riverboat invasion. If Randy's going to be there, you know it's a party. That's incredible. That's incredible. Let's see what else. Foster Moss also mentioning that Brock Vandegrift once came to Georgia from Prince Avenue Christian. That is indeed true. His dad, until last season, or last season being his final season, was coach. Greg Vandegrift was at Prince Avenue Christian. He has since gone back to his home state in Tennessee. And John Richt, who had been offensive coordinator, obviously the son of Mark Richt, and a former Prince Avenue Christian quarterback, has his debut coaching tonight for Prince Avenue Christian. So there are Georgia ties all over the place the next 4 days. Jonathan Aaron says, you give so much good betting advice. How can you not expect people to gamble? Well, I'm not the gambling police. If you do gamble, that's all for you to do. And as I say, I sort of can't help but be fascinated by it. We even made a gambling note during the show today. I'm trying to limit my gambling notes just because I just feel like it does get to be, I don't know. I think post 2018, the legalization of gambling has had a decidedly net negative impact on society overall. I really do. My general feeling about a lot of things in life, gambling being one of them, is people are going to do it no matter what. But I think that limiting access is probably a good idea even for yourself. Driving to a casino, walking inside, going up to a window, there's a little bit of friction involved in that transaction. Whereas when you take something that's addictive like gambling and pairing it with something else that's addictive like your phone, well, now you've got like addiction stacked on top of each other, which is probably not a great thing. So I try to limit my sort of gambling talk, but admittedly, I am sort of fascinated by it. And so we mentioned that today about, one of the things that gamblers are always paying attention to are injured centers. And so you better believe that, quietly getting very little attention. Georgia's backup center, which supposedly been practicing pretty well, been here for a little while. He goes down with injury. Georgia's backup now probably becomes Cortez Smith. At least I think probably. Now, Smith's a really good prospect. Cortez was a part of a really good Parkview program, coaching staff that we know pretty well. He was starting there as a freshman. So Cortez Smith one day probably going to be a very good center at Georgia, a player you're very happy to have. It's a hard position to play as a freshman, though. So, sometimes we just talk about things that you just sort of file away. And it's not for everybody. And everybody has the capacity to understand, file this away type of thing. Some people can sort of only talk about quarterback. We try to sort of broaden out and just sort of go beyond that. So backup center getting injured yesterday, new backup, probably a freshman, one day good, young now at a position that matters. You better believe that every gambler in America that takes this seriously takes note of that sort of thing, because over the course of a long season, sometimes your starting center gets injured too. And all of a sudden now things change.
Can I make an observation real quick?
By all means, Jay Black joins us.
Very impressive that 2 of the 4 players that have their number retired have made it past 90 years old.
It is. Oh, yeah, that's right. So I have to admit I was thrilled to hear that Mr. Sapp was still with us. I don't know that I would have known that. So Theron Sapp and then obviously Charlie Trippi made it all the way to 100, which is just amazing. When Mr. Trippi passed, what we said is that the incredible story of kind of what he was, eventually you had to add the fact that he lived 100 years as a part of what made him amazing. And so Theron Sapp being 90, is that how old he is, Jay-Z, 90?
Yes.
That is really amazing. And so I didn't know if I was just the only one that didn't know he was still alive. But I'm thrilled that he is. Because it's an awesome story. And I think it speaks to what makes rivalries in college football fun, that, Georgia's other 3 retired numbers are sort of easy no-brainers, the 2 Heisman Trophy winners, and, of course, the former number 1 overall pick, Charlie Trippi, who may have been, I would say that historians would say that Sinkwich is more well-known than Trippi because he won the Heisman, but Trippi may have been the better player between the 2. I think there are people who would say that. And then the 4th Georgia retired number is a little bit more of an interesting piece of trivia, that Sapp, who is not the same level of player as the other 3, but beating Tech at that time was such a big deal that his jersey got retired because of it. It's just sort of a cool piece of Georgia football history, and I'm glad that Jeff Sintel had a chance to be around that yesterday. I miss the days of the Bulldog Club. I'm a big fan, for instance, of the Jacksonville Bulldog Club. The Augusta Bulldog Club is a great one. We talked yesterday a little bit about the kind of way in which some of the fan fabric is sort of slipping away here a little bit, just across, not at Georgia. I'm not saying something bad about Georgia. I'm just saying across the board, some of this is slipping away. If you have a chance to be a part of a fan community in your local community, I think you really should. It's just a good way to meet good people. Georgia fans, some of the best people you ever meet. So this is not a commercial because I'm not getting paid for it, but if you live in an area that has an active Bulldog Club, I think you should be a part of it. I think you'll be glad you did. By the way, Foster Moss, speaking of gambling advice, won't be long before Go With The Flow will be returning, and we'll be making our picks. And we trust that you'll all use those responsibly. I mean, it's kind of a, and I say this kiddingly, modestly, the real dilemma for me is for somebody who's trying to sort of downplay the influence that gambling has on sports overall. The hard thing about that is I'm just so dadgum good at picking games that, at a certain point in time, it's just hard. Let's see what else. Lon Talton asking a question. No, Lon, I don't know that I remember that. Tennille asking about Jay Black. Yeah, Jay's a big part of our coverage around here, producing many days, a part of almost all of our shows, a big part of everything we do, for sure. Let me go to DawgNation.com and hit that chat for a moment. And then after that, y'all got to get ready to go. Randy Hollis about the high school game. So, yeah, as we've been saying now, so today we've got Callaway, Prince Avenue Christian. We'll have Kell, South Paulding tonight. I'll have another doubleheader on Friday. That'll be Cass LaGrange. This is from Barron Stadium in Rome. And we'll have a really good game between Creekside and Rome that night. And then I'll have the final two games in Mercedes-Benz Stadium on Saturday, which will be on Atlanta News First, Channel 46. It'll be McEachern and Walton. And then the final game, a game I'm just thrilled to be able to call, Douglas County and North Gwinnett. That should be an awesome game. Should be an awesome game. UGA Marine says I should do a magazine like the famous Dave Campbell magazine in Texas. Well, I can barely read, so I'm not quite sure how well I could write for a magazine, but it would be fun. As someone who likes magazines, I'd like to be a part of a magazine. UGA Marine, that's a good idea. SEM Dog says the problem with making money for anyone is the more you make, the more you want. Paying the players will never take away the temptation to make even more gambling. That's turning out to be true, especially as Michael Porter Jr. said, for when you have a chance to make money for those around you. And listen, anybody who's ever made money doing anything will tell you that the people around you are the ones that eventually kind of get you in trouble sometimes. People get mad when I say this, but sometimes when it comes to like friendships, I don't know that like rich people and not quite so rich people are a great pairing for friendships, because sometimes the guy with nothing to lose puts the guy that does have something to lose in jeopardy. And I'd say what Michael Porter described in the podcast interview is a pretty good example of that. That when you think, oh man, this is, when you're making a lot of money playing sports, you, I think, falsely believe that money comes easy. And boy, there's some hard lessons that come from that, because once the playing days are over, money doesn't come quite so easy anymore, and that's tricky. And you think, well, gosh, this gambling thing's easy. I know how this game's going to go, or I can influence how this game's going to go. I mean, I'm going to talk out of both sides of my mouth, because while I do think there is at least some risk of more of that going on than people realize, I think for the athletes who would be tempted by that, it's also a lot easier to get caught than you realize. The books know when something's fishy. They just sort of do. The fact that someone won is the first tip-off. Garrison Tucker also pointing out that, there are no more blurred lines anymore between like the gambling entities and the sports leagues. I mean, it's all just one thing now. They are very closely tied to each other now, for sure. SEM Dog says he doesn't mind one bit that Juan Gaston's pushed to the front of the line. Yeah, I think you want guys to sort of spice up the competition a little bit. I think you do. Brian Whitaker checking out. Brian, we're about to as well. Appreciate that. Brian Whitaker also says that September through December is the best time of the year. Boy, I would agree. I love it. Bobby Leather says 5th in the polls. Let's go get that natty. I like that as well. Bill Camacho says he thinks that Chris Cole can be a future Buckus Award winner. I'm all about that too. Final comments. Chris Jacobs says he's having a hard time commenting through DawgNation articles. I'm not sure about that. Let me see if I can find something out about that. Jay, if we can do anything to help him, I think you probably got to register through the forum, I think. But boy, they don't let me do a lot of that kind of stuff. Mark Hubbard, thanks for the kind words. Appreciate it. Lon Talton thought he was going to get me on one, but he did not. Sonic Chaos says, which team is hyping itself too much? Almost every year there is a preseason top 10 team that finishes unranked. I would say safest bet for that this year is probably Miami. But if you want a contrarian take on this, we've said this before, watch out for LSU if LSU doesn't beat Clemson. And by the way, once again, to kind of bring gambling talk back into this, not only is LSU not favored to win that game, it is on the road. If you care about early line movement, we've seen early line movement in the direction of Clemson, which means that there are people somewhere who seem to think that Clemson's set up pretty well for that game. Now, maybe they're wrong, but this is a tough putt for LSU week 1. And for a team that showed a little bit of quit factor in the past, let's watch what happens to LSU on the other side of that game against Clemson if they weren't to win. So safest bet to kind of fall apart from the top 10, Miami. Sort of sneaky contrarian take. Keep your eye on LSU if they don't beat Clemson. Now, if they beat Clemson, they could be off and running. But they're going to have a lot of stakes tied up in that week 1 game. So fun stuff, great questions. We appreciate the conversation. Come back, do more of it tomorrow. I'll also see on TV this afternoon for our Corky Kell Dave Hunter Classic. And y'all check out our friends at RS Andrews, online, rsandrews.com. By the way, they're also usually part of our high school coverage as well. I trust that's true once again here this year. Hot weather, they'll get your air conditioning tuned up to factory fresh specs. You can always trust them on that. So make sure you do that. They'll keep you cool and comfortable because when the season kind of gets going, the weather's as hot as it's ever been. So be in anticipation of that with our friends at RS Andrews online, rsandrews.com. Have a great day. We are back tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management. We will look forward to talking to you then.